Now for the big story, and an extraordinary race row has exploded following a Channel 4 documentary investigation in which a supposed Reform UK campaigner was heard making appalling racist remarks about the Prime Minister Rishi Sunak. Here is a clip from the Channel 4 documentary.
Recruits there, yeah, with guns on the beach, target practice, just shoot them. The ring fence Bradford-Starn round and just do that you've got these bastards running our country. You must be f***ing joking, mate. I've always been a Tory voter. What annoys me is the he got in. What's good is he? You tell me, you know, he's just wet. What, Sunak? Useless. Yeah.
Outrageous comments. Here's the response of Reform UK leader Nigel Farage.
What happened over the last weekend was truly astonishing. A tirade of invective abuse directed at the Prime Minister. It didn't ring true. So I checked it out. It turns out the man that did this is an actor. On his own site, he says, "I'm a well-spoken actor with an alter ego. I do rough talking." Let me tell you, from the minute he turned up in that office in Clacton and I saw him, he was acting from the very start. He even says on his website, "Hire me, I do undercover filming." This is a total and utter set-up.
However, since then, Reform UK has dropped 3 of its candidates following reports that they had made offensive or racist comments. So does Reform UK have a problem with race? To discuss this, I'm delighted to welcome Britain's best-known political double act, Neil and Christine Hamilton, the Hamiltons. Neil, this dreadful man was campaigning for Reform UK. He said those terrible things. Surely the buck stops with Nigel Farage on this one.
Well, no political party could possibly vet all its activists or people who volunteer to campaign for it. And this fellow, Andrew Parker, whatever his name was, is not a member of UKIP. Not UKIP, Reform. In fact, you can't join Reform as such. You can't get a membership of the party, even if you send them any money. So, of course, it's embarrassing for Reform UK that they have somebody speaking in that way. Who is campaigning for them. But nobody applies to be a campaigner for a political party. And if you look into the Labour Party or the Tory Party, you'll find cranks and misfits who are campaigning for them, knocking on doors and so on as well. In fact, you have to be a bit of a crank or a misfit to campaign for the Tory Party at all these days, don't you? But, we had all these problems in UKIP as well. I don't think it matters very much at all. He's been disowned, and that's that. Yes, they've discovered they've got a few candidates who have also said disgraceful or unacceptable things. But this is an insurgent party which has mushroomed up from nowhere in a very short time. They don't have the infrastructure for vetting that the old parties have got. UKIP had the same problems years ago. Does it really matter? What really matters is what does the party propose for the public at large? And I can't believe this is going to have the slightest impact upon Reform's performance on Thursday next. It's a distraction which the other parties are using to try to disguise their own failings. What I'm amazed is they want to give Farage the oxygen of publicity, which, if they were sensible, they would seek to deny him, because what he hates most of all is not being in the news, not being noticed, not having the opportunity to grandstand. So I think that they've shot themselves in the foot, actually, by making a meal of this.
Christine, this party has indeed mushroomed up, I should say, but perhaps they're on the magic mushrooms. Why do you think that the party is attracting these dreadful people with their disgusting views?
Well, you say these dreadful people with their disgusting views. We've had, 3 candidates and this fellow who may or may not be an actor. As to the truth of the Channel 4 thing, only time will tell. Most of us have absolutely no idea whether he was legitimate or not, whether Nigel is right that it was a complete set-up job. I agree that this needs to be pursued, because we, for example, have been the subject of television programmes setting us up way back in the 1980s when Panorama used some incredibly devious tactics to stitch Neil up. So, it's very easy for these television programmes to do it. I have no idea whether this fellow is genuine, but as Neil said, I think it's wrong to make a huge meal of this because Nigel has knocked it on the head. Anybody who's still worried about it will have to say, well, let's wait and see. But, you know, every party has racists within it. The Tory party does, the Labour Party does. Some are anti-black, some are anti-Muslim, some are anti-Jewish, and they all have them. And there are people, you know, people under the woodwork, under the dead leaves that no party really wants to be caught on camera, especially when they think they're at a private function. So I don't think it's unique to reform.
I mean, there are numerous people who were Conservative MPs in the last Parliament who are not standing at this election because of their own indiscretions of one kind or another. So does that tar the entire Conservative Party with their brush? No, of course it doesn't. So I think that this is a typical kind of election squall, which will blow itself out very quickly.
Indeed, and of course we know Labour had a well-reported problem with anti-Semitism. However, Christine, before I hear from the Prime Minister and Ed Davey, will what has happened this week dent Reform UK's performance on Thursday? Do you think it will affect their votes?
I shouldn't think so, no, and there'll be no way of telling, to be perfectly honest. I think, of course, there have been two storms as far as reform is concerned. There's been this one, and then there's the storm when Nigel said his remarks about Putin, which I think was wrong. He shouldn't have said it because it gives Putin an excuse for what he's done. And that caused quite a storm, and that might have turned quite a few people off. But there won't really be any way, I wouldn't think, of measuring it unless the opinion pollsters go around afterwards and say, well, would you have voted for reform if they hadn't done this? So, no, I think they're heading for a pretty good result, frankly, reform.
I mean, the so-called racism story is a typical kind of Westminster bubble media storm, isn't it? The general public at large have made up their minds already long since. First of all, they're going to get rid of the Tories and consign them halfway to oblivion. And although nobody really wants Starmer and Labour government, that's going to be the consequence of it. And they don't care, frankly, because they want to get rid of the lot who's currently in. But because reform suddenly has bubbled up to get anything between 15 or 20% of the vote, plus the other parties like UKIP, that are also standing in this election, which will have a big effect on the total result when they're combined. That's the reality of this, and there's going to be a sea change which is going to affect the landscape of British politics for the next 5 or 10 years. And the key question is whether the Conservative Party is going to wake up to the reasons why they're facing the abyss. And if they don't, then reform is going to replace them, possibly.
OK, fascinating stuff. Well, you say it's a Westminster bubble story, not for the Prime Minister, who was understandably deeply offended by the remarks of that alleged Reform UK campaigner. Let's take a listen to Rishi Sunak.
Well, my two daughters have to see and hear Reform people who campaign for Nigel Farage calling me an effing. It hurts and it makes me angry, and I think he has some questions to answer. When you see Reform candidates and campaigners seemingly using racist and misogynistic language and opinions, seemingly without challenge, I think it tells you something about the culture within the Reform Party. Our politics and country is better than that. It's my duty to call out this corrosive and divisive behaviour.
And let's hear from the leader of the Liberal Democrats, Sir Ed Davey, on this issue.
Liberal Democrats share no values with Mr Farage. He can sort himself out. My job as Liberal Democrat leader is to tell you what we're about. I want to fight a positive campaign about how we rescue our NHS, make sure we get the investment in health and care, make sure we sort out the cost of living problems that people are really suffering under, and deal with things like the environmental issues like sewage. And I think people get fed up in this campaign when there's all these diversions and nastiness. They want to know what you're going to do for them, and that's what Liberal Democrats are going to say.
Responding to Mr Farage's claims, a spokesperson for my old employer's Channel 4 said the following: "We strongly stand by our rigorous and duly impartial journalism, which speaks for itself. We met Mr Parker for the first time at Reform UK's headquarters, where he was a Reform Party canvasser. We did not pay the Reform UK canvasser or anyone else in this report. Mr Parker was not known to Channel 4 News and was filmed covertly via an undercover operation." Listen, Neil, I've only got a couple of seconds left. How well do you think Reform UK can do on Thursday? How many seats do you think they could bag?
Well, the first part of the post-electoral system is very difficult to predict until you get up beyond sort of 25 or 30%, excuse me, of the vote. So I wouldn't like to name a figure. I've seen as many as 18 being predicted by certain pollsters, and as few as 3. So it's anybody's guess, depending on the turnout. That's another factor that nobody can predict. How many people are actually going to turn out and vote on Thursday? That's going to be one of the most important factors, because inertia is often actually the biggest factor in an election.
Christine Hamilton, you are the last word, so you get the last word.
Well, I think just going back to the original question, watching Rishi Sunak just then, I think there'll be a big backwash of sympathy for him because of what was said, whether it was a setup or not. It must have been deeply hurtful for him. And the reference he made to his daughters having to be aware of those sort of remarks being made about their father, I think that will cause a massive sympathy for him. Whether that translates into any extra votes, who knows?
Neil, Christine Hamilton, fantastic to have you on the show. Enjoy the rest of your Saturday evening. I've got no doubt there'll be a drop of Pinot Grigio involved. I certainly hope so.